Okay, so now we're going to talk about honeybee nutrition and the importance of feeding your bees. Okay, like I said, the other classes, I believe in learning the biology of everything and how things work together and nutritional needs of honeybees and everything that's related to the bees themselves. Nutrition is a huge part. What do our bees live on? Nectar, right? We obviously know they get nectar from the trees and they bring that back. What is nectar? Nectar is sucrose, compound sugar. The bees take in nectar into their honey stomachs and they mix it with an enzyme called invertase, which starts breaking it down into two simple sugars, fructose, glucose, or dextrose, whatever you want to call it. It can be called either one. What do they do with those sugars? Each sugar does something different for the bees. Sucrose, the compound sugar, that stimulates the bees' wax glands, stimulates the queen to lay, which is why in the springtime when you get that first flow of nectar, the queen takes off really late and they start rearing brood. Okay? When it's broken down into fructose, glucose, that's honey. And the bees use honey to put weight on the hive, store it for the winter time, for slack times. They also get fat from honey. They make fat bodies from it. Okay? So we have to understand what they need out of their nectar and what nectar does for them. And we have to understand what the other component is, which is pollen. Pollen is a protein. Bees need carbohydrates, those sugars, and they need protein, the pollens. Together, that's what their diet consists of. Our bees don't require to take fat in. They manufacture their own fat bodies, so they don't consume exterior fat really. They just carbohydrates, proteins. So, with that said, who eats what? Do they all eat the same thing? Nope. Nope. Different things for different reasons. When an egg hatches, no matter if it's going to be a queen bee, a worker bee, or a drone, the first 3 days of that bee's larval life, it's fed royal jelly. Where does royal jelly come from? It comes from the hyperpharyngeal gland of the worker bees. When they're about 5 days old, somewhere in that range, that gland activates and they start making royal jelly in this gland in their head, and that's what they feed to these larvae for the first 3 days. For that nurse bee to make that royal jelly, that needs a special diet. The diet that needs is bee bread. What is bee bread? Bee bread is that pollen we talked about, them gathering, that they brought back. And when they're bringing it back, of course, they're taking it, some of it in their mouth and moving it down, putting it in their pollen baskets, and it's getting mixed with some of their saliva, and it's causing an enzymatic change in that pollen, and it turns it into something that the bees can digest, eat and digest. They can't digest regular pollen, raw pollen. So that'll start happening. They'll take that pollen back to the hive. They'll put it into a cell. They'll put if you've ever pulled a frame out, I know Pam, I think, did that. She sent me a picture or something of one little round little dot in a cell. What is this? It was like a red dot. She was in a big panic. It was just a pollen ball. The bees bring that back, and they'll put that in a cell, and they'll keep putting it in there. They'll push it in with their head, packing it in. So normally what we see is, that cell full of pollen. It's got a thin layer of nectar or honey on it to preserve it. Honey's a preservative because it'll ferment. And the older pollen is, the less nutritious it is for honeybees. So that's what that is. You'll see that raw pollen brought in, and they'll gradually pack it in there and mix it with honey. So that is called bee bread. That's the diet that nurse bees eat to make royal jelly. And that's the diet that is fed to larvae once they reach that 4-day and older larval stage, with the exception of a queen bee. Queen bee larvae get royal jelly their entire life, their entire larval life. That's what they're fed. Okay? So, if we have a dearth of either nectar or pollen, what happens in our hive? Anybody know? Brood rearing stops. All brood rearing stops. Is that a good thing? No. In the past, 30, 40 years ago, it wasn't a big deal. Our bees were a lot stronger. They didn't have to deal with varroa mites. So we would have these dearths in the summertime, but it wasn't no big deal. Now, as beekeepers, for us to be successful and take our cluster into winter as large as possible, we cannot let our bees shut down. We've got to keep them fed. Okay? So, that's where we come in. Nectar. If there's not a flow on, the bees are not getting nectar, we've got to substitute something. We think back to what I just talked about and talked about what each sugar does. Could you feed corn syrup? Corn syrup is glucose fructose. Can we feed that to the honeybees in the summer to raise brood? Yes or no? Anybody want to say yes? No. Good answers. No. Because it's not what they need. They need sucrose, right? If our hive is light in the fall, can we feed them corn syrup? High fructose corn syrup? Yes. No. But in the summer, in that summer dearth, to keep them raising brood, we've got to make sure they're getting sucrose. All right? How do we do that? A lot of ways. Regular cane table sugar mixed with water. That mimics nectar. You look at nectar in nature, 80% water, 20% sucrose. So we can do that easily with sugar. That is probably the easiest way to stimulate or continue brood rearing. However, in the summertime, springtime is not a problem. We have a lot of nectar coming in. You know, everything's blooming in the springtime. So the bees can make enough, they have enough spare nectar coming in that they convert a lot of it to honey and they store it as surplus honey in the hive. Not a problem. During the summer dearth, that doesn't happen. If any of you have been beekeepers for more than a year or two, this summer or the summer before weren't as bad. This summer was worse than last year. Previous summer was really bad. We had a shutdown of the nectar flow as usual, but there was nothing. And I would have beekeepers from my club, relatively new beekeepers, calling me and saying, "There's something wrong with my hive. I have no brood in my hive. You know, and my queen's just walking around." And they said, "Can you come and look? There's something wrong. I think my queen's sick. I think this." So I'd go take a look at these hives, and when I pulled the frame out of the brood nest, I pulled that out, and there might be some capped brood in there, and that was it. There was no wet nectar. We've all seen wet nectar, right? Uncapped, and it looks wet. You know, wet nectar in the hive. We'd see that, and we'd see a ring of pollen in there. Well, I'd go to these hives, and there'd be nothing. No pollen, no nectar. So, no pollen, no nectar, no brood, no food, nothing to raise baby bees. And the other bees are staying alive on what little honey there was. And for a lot of the hives, there was not even any honey in them because they pulled their honey supers, and there was none backfilled in the brood nest. So, in the summer, I recommend feeding definitely sucrose solution. Without a doubt, you've got to feed sucrose. But even better is a mixture of some sort of sucrose, fructose, glucose. Right? Corn syrup mixed with sucrose, right? Syrup. That'll give your bees all three sugars they need. And that'll keep them that side of it. The carbohydrate side, it'll keep supplied to the bees. The pollen side is another story. Our bees need pollen. And again, some summers we still have a trickle of pollen all the way in. And sometimes it shuts off completely for a while. When that happens, they stop rearing brood. They have to have both at all times to rear brood. Studies have shown that even when we have a lot of nectar and pollen out there, and say we have 2-3 days rain, steady rain, where the bees can't fly, they already cut back on their brood rearing. They know. They know what pollen they have in that hive. They know what wet nectar they have in that hive. If they see those supplies running out, they stop rearing brood, or they start consuming brood. So what's happening in the summer periods, the queen, she may or may not shut down laying eggs. But even if she's laying eggs, still, the nurse bees will come in and they'll cannibalize those eggs and remove larvae from the cells, maybe eat them, maybe get them out of the hive, because they know they can't raise them. Remember that the hive functions pretty much like an organism, right? One for all for one. Bees will starve altogether, not one by one by one by one. They share everything. So if I had one drop of nectar and somebody's begging for it, I'll share half of it. And if that person now has half of my half, somebody begs them, they'll share half. So basically when a hive collapses from starvation, it all collapses at once. That would happen in the summertime. And it can if there's just not enough. Usually we have a trickle in there to keep bees alive, some bees alive, but they don't grow. They'll stop raising that brood. So we need to supply both. Now, like I said, 30, 40 years ago, they didn't feed sugar syrup most of the time. They never fed pollen. Times changed, and you cannot keep bees any more successfully without a feeding program. So the different bee companies, us included, have come up with various pollen substitutes. Ours, we have something called Ultra Bee and another one called Bee Pro. I prefer the Ultra Bee. It's got a higher protein content to it. But this is just a powder. It's just a ground powder of, I can't tell you the top secret ingredients in it. But this serves as a pollen substitute. Now, bees like to forage. I said that in the other classes. Bees, they prefer to forage for everything they do. So this we would put out for our bees during that pollen dearth. We're feeding them a sugar syrup. Did you bring a Boardman feeder in? That's okay. That's fine. In the summertime, I'll feed with an entrance Boardman feeder with a jar like this, full of syrup on the front of the hive. And for my pollen, I do one of two things and sometimes both. There's two forms of pollen substitute. There's what we call patty. And these are pollen patties. And they're mixed with a little bit of corn syrup to keep them pliable so they don't get rock hard. What I do with mine is I'm talking about the summer dearth specifically at this point. You'll have 2 brood boxes on there. At least 2, or if you're running mediums, you'll have 3. If you're running 3 brood boxes, find out where the 2 boxes have the majority of the brood. But in a 2 deep system, you've only got 2 anyway. I put on 2 pollen patties at a time. Put them on just right on top of these top bars like that, right? And then I put my second box right back on top of it, right back on top, and then put my covers on. That's right there between the brood. The bees will eat that very quickly. They'll take that. Another way to feed, like I said, they like to forage. So I will take this. Yes?
When I used the pollen patties, I had a problem with small hive beetle.
Very good point. I'll talk about that in 1 second. So I preferred using dry as well. I'll take some of this, I'll put it in a 5-gallon bucket, put it right at the very bottom of the 5-gallon bucket. I'll take that bucket out somewhere, and I'll put it, I put it on my stone wall. I slightly tilt it up like this so the rain doesn't get back here where I have the pollen, and leave it out there. The bees will come and forage for that. I have a picture of it somewhere. Do we have one printed out anywhere? We'll have to get one of those. We have a picture of them foraging in Thanksgiving, taking pollen. And they'll take, when you give them dry pollen, they actually eat the patties faster as well for some reason. But giving them this dry pollen, they'll bring this back, and then they continue to raise brood.
You have problems with ants getting in the pollen? Do ants go after the pollen?
No, not as far as I can tell. Skunks, yes. Raccoons, yes. And one neighbor I suspect has been eating my pollen. Bears will definitely take it. My dog ate it, threw it back up.
But you can take a dig if it's by your house. You can take it in each day.
You could, yes. And I know the ladies, the bee squad at the University of Minnesota, they actually eat these patties. They're edible. They eat them like those exercise pro. Yeah, they do taste good.
They do. I taste them.
Like those. What are those exercise bars you used to eat? Those protein bars.
Yeah.
Whatever they were called. Yeah, they taste kind of like that. But yeah, Power Bar. That's it.
Who eats those?
The bee squad, the women of the bee squad out at University of Minnesota. But so if you put that pollen, dry pollen out there, and have the patties in here, and you're feeding syrup, your bees will continue to raise brood, which is exactly what you want. The whole goal of all of this stuff is to continue to keep that big, strong brood nest going into winter. And I always tell people, don't try to build your brood nest in October. It's too late. You're thinking about your winter brood nest in July and August when there's nothing. That's when you're thinking about it. Because these are the bees that are going to raise the bees that go through winter. So you always have to think a few brood cycles ahead. So the question here was, or the statement was, when I use patties, I get hive beetles, a lot of hive beetles. And that is true. Beetles love patties. If you have a problem with hive beetles, they love these patties. If you put this on a hive that's weak, that's not a super strong hive, the beetles are going to take over that hive. So what you may want to do, if you have beetles, and the hive isn't really strong, you would cut this patty maybe, you'd only put a quarter of one on, not a big one. And then when the bees consume that, put a new piece on. You'd want to do that. And it's another reason for feeding dry as well. By the way, hive beetles in our area, we are not like down south. We have hive beetles, but they're not a problem. Our hive beetles can almost never overwhelm our hive unless we have a weak hive and it's dying. Then the beetles can take over. Our beetles don't overwinter very well. The way they operate is they lay their eggs in the hive, the larvae hatch those maggots, and they eat the pollen and brood and whatever else they eat in there. Then they crawl out of the hive, drop to the ground, dig down into the ground, they pupate, and then they hatch out as adult hive beetles, and the cycle starts again. Because we have more of a clay soil up here, and we have cold winters, good freezes, our hive beetles don't persist in the ground year over year. So you won't, if you have a hive beetle infestation in the fall, generally spring it'll be gone. A few hive beetles will overwinter in that cluster, adults. So you may not get rid of all of them, but you won't have the huge numbers. I've never ever had a hive beetle problem. Do I have hive beetles? Yeah, but I don't have a problem with them. So that's pretty much what our nutrition involves. I said this was going to be a very short class because it's not much to it. It's pretty simple, pretty straightforward. I just like to stress to people, keep your bees fed. Anytime you go in the summertime and you can't find that band of pollen around your brood and open wet nectar, your hive is starving. It's plain and simple. And when it's in starvation mode, it's in preservation mode, not raising brood. And you'll find that if you have enough colonies that you can mess around and do some testing, you let a hive do that in the summertime, not feed it. And you'll see that going into winter, it's got that small cluster. Its chance of survival is relatively slim. Okay. So, any questions on nutrition or yes?
How late in the fall would you keep feeding the pollen patties? Or would you not feed them in the fall?
Like I said, what I prefer to do is the summertime when there's like no pollen out there and they're still trying to raise a lot of brood, I put the patties between here and the summertime. Into fall, as long as the bees can still fly, and like I said, I have a picture of bees taking pollen from my bucket on Thanksgiving. A lot of bees, hundreds and hundreds. So I would have my bucket out until they don't fly anymore. Patties, I usually stop feeding. I don't want to feed them in the fall because I don't want to crack this propolis seal if I can help it between the boxes, so I don't want to crack it to put them in there. Usually by fall, with our goldenrod aster bloom that we have, they usually will have a sufficient amount of pollen put away in the fall. Fall pollen is not usually my concern. It's usually that summer time period. And early spring, when we overwinter these bees and we come into spring, the bees will be all up top in this top box, right? You'll see them on the top bars. That's when I may throw another pollen patty right on top there for the bees. Because if it's cold and they can't fly yet, and they've run out of pollen that they stored from last year, again, they're going to cut back on brood rearing. If you've got that pollen patty up top, they'll start consuming that. And if they haven't consumed it by the time you see them bringing in a lot of real pollen, you can just remove it, throw it away. So again, you might want to put a half a patty on there. If they take it, put another half on. Yes?
Would you recommend during the summertime using a pollen trap?
The question is, would I recommend in the summertime using a pollen trap? Never. Not in the summer, because our summer, we have no pollen, not enough. When you use a pollen trap, I don't know if anybody here has ever used a pollen trap on their hive. What we're basically doing is stealing the bees' food. So it could have an impact on their brood rearing, right, if we steal too much. So you never want to leave a pollen trap on a hive all season, not actively stealing the pollen. You would want to take that pollen trap and every few days move it to another hive if you're going to collect pollen. Were you thinking of collecting for yourself or to get back to the bees? Or
just to get back to the bees at some point.
Yeah, to me, if you've never used one, you'll see it's a fair amount of work. So maybe one of those things, rather than do that, you use something like this, a pollen substitute in that girth. It'll be much easier because you have to put that pollen trap on the bottom. You have to empty that tray every day because pollen is a very perishable product. That's why if you buy pollen in a jar, it's always dried out. Whereas if you pull it out of a cell, it's sticky, right? If you just take it fresh like that and leave it sit around, it'll go bad, it'll ferment. So you have to either dry it or freeze it, within a day or so of harvesting it. So I personally don't think for hobbyist beekeepers, it's not worth you harvesting your pollen. You're doing it at the bee's expense. So, maybe if you were really diligent about it and removed it, for 3 days and froze it and then took the trap off and let your bees go, maybe put it on a few weeks later if you still had a good pollen supply coming in, did it again and froze it, then you might have some, again, for that summer dearth. However, bees use a lot of pollen. I think I had it when the last November, I think this yard had somewhere around 16 hives in it. And they were taking a pound of this a day out of my bucket. This is a 1 pound container. They were taking a pound a day. I had to keep filling it because they just were taking it. Well, for you to gather a pound of dry pollen would take a very long time and a large number of hives. You couldn't take that off one hive and not affect their growth. So, any other questions on nutrition? Or yes, Frank?
When you put new bees in the spring, would it be good to keep a partial pollen patty in those new hives? You got a queen that's looking for stimulation to lay eggs.
Yeah.
We have sugar. I'm always putting sugar bottle there to help feed them, but maybe I should put a
pollen patty there. Doesn't stimulate the queen to lay. The sugar, the syrup does. The
sugar does, but the pollen gives her the stuff she needs.
Right. So this is a brand new hive, right? Yeah. On foundation, maybe. So there's no drawn comb in there. You're just putting in straight foundation on a package.
Yeah.
Yes. You could put a patty up top there, and just watch it. And then obviously, if you start seeing beetles or anything, you could remove it. But as soon as the bees start actively flying, it's warm enough they can fly.
Yeah.
There's pollen out by the time we get packages in.
Yeah.
So if they can fly, they're going to ignore that patty. If you monitor, when you go into, let's say, you let your queen out or check on her 10 days after you've let her out, if that patty is not being consumed, I would remove it at that point because they're going to go for real pollen. So, yes?
Could you give us some rules of thumb regarding the weight of the hive, through the winter? If we're testing out our hive throughout the winter, what's the ballpark weights we should be looking for on a typical hive? Let's say you have 2 full boxes that they're sitting out there.
That's a tough one. I mean, because you won't have a scale out there with you, right? So how are you going to know what that weight is? I would say
I've heard people, using the tilt and weigh half the hive.
If you've got one of those, you can do that. But I was saying in the earlier classes, whenever I go out to my bee yard, before I go into a hive, I always try to do this to it. Lift it. Yeah. And then I look in. When I open up to work it, I see how much honey, how many bees, and you can get a general idea. Like if you were not hadn't been a beekeeper, you came up and I put the lid on this one right now, and you lift it, you go, oh, that's heavy, it's got some honey in it. When it's empty, it's just frames, right? But as you become more and more experienced and whatnot with keeping bees, you'll get to know, and that's heavy. Like I expect when I go up to my hives now that have that fall honey packed in them, I'm going to go to lift it and go, I can't hardly lift it with one hand. That's a good full hive. If I can lift it now up in my bee yard, I know it's light. Right off the bat, I know it's light and I have to start feeding immediately. If I can't lift it, I know it has a good amount of honey on it. So somewhere in between there, right? In the wintertime when I go out there, and usually you will have, if you go into fall pretty happy about the weight of your hive, it'll be fine through January. It's that February-March period. And why? Because our bees are, they're raising very small amounts of broods, sometime in January the queen starts laying again. And they're just raising maybe a few hundred bees, not a big demand. But as soon as they start getting that first nectar flow, they take off. And sometimes they can't, like I said, it's raining, we get a cold snap. After that queen has laid a lot of brood in there, and they have these huge requirements for feed, and they can't gather new food, and they go through what they have very quickly. You can go from having a bunch of 4 or 5 frames of honey there within a few days of having none. in the springtime. So as soon as it started to warm up, I put some sort of feed on them, no matter what. Even though they're gathering nectar, pollen I'm not so concerned about because they won't die, from lack of pollen in the springtime. They just won't be raising as much brood. They will die from lack of carbohydrates in the springtime. So, any other questions? Yes.
The feeder that goes in on the frame that goes in the hive.
Right.
So you're recommending to put that in the second, or if you have a third box, which box?
Well, I would probably, for overwintering, you're talking about?
Well, I wanted to know what size to buy because my third box is shorter than the box below because the other one's a deep box.
Yeah.
The other one's like a honey super. So
Right.
They have both sizes.
Yeah, so your third box is your medium.
The third box is, I think it's 6 or 8 inches. It's the
6 5/8 the medium. So what's your brood box configuration?
It's like 2 of those and then
2 deeps.
well, 2 deeps and
So
then
you don't need that. Number one, you don't need that medium.
okay.
You don't need that for winter. If this one's full, if this one's full and the one below it is pretty full, you're fine. But I would put this feeder probably in this top box. The reason being, when your bees run out of food, right? Number one, you can fill this easier if it's up here. You just have to take the lid off, feed, put syrup in here, put the lid back on to keep it full, right?
Right.
Number two, your bees are going to be down here in the wintertime. And they're going to work their way up as winter end, goes along. They're going to work up. They're going to end up here in the springtime, right? You don't want to have to, and they're out of food. You don't want to come out here, have to take this box off to fill this if it's down here. Springtime, you can just move this lid to the side, fill this with syrup, move the lid back over. And you can even, if the cluster's over here, you can remove a frame or two, move this feeder closer to the bees. Have it where you can access it early in the spring when they're starving. Remember, our bees, the majority of our honeybees starve in that March, April. That's our starvation months for honeybees, not January.
And the boxes that we take off, so I have 2 boxes of that now, but some of them have some honey, but it's not capped, or there's some capped on one side, not capped on the other. So when I take all those frames off, how will I store them, or what would I do with them?
Well, you should extract that honey.
Even though it's not capped?
Yes, because I was talking to someone out there about uncapped honey. Think of it this way. The bees draw these cells out, right, in containers, and they're going to fill them with honey. They're very, very thrifty and resourceful, and they'll wait till that cell is full and they'll cap it. What happens when the nectar runs out? Number one, they don't make any more honey to put in there, no more nectar to store in there to fill it up. And number two, no nectar, they can't make wax. They need a nectar flow to make wax glands. So when the nectar flow shuts off, things stop where they are. Does that mean that honey is unripe and unusable? No. Honey, it takes to take raw nectar that the bees bring in and dry it to honey, the moisture content of honey, it only takes about 3 or 4 days. And we have warm weather. The bees are constantly here fanning and moving. So if the nectar flow shuts off today, within a week that honey will be ripe because it's already come in through their honey stomach, right, brought it back to the hive, so it's been mixed with those enzymes. It's been broken down. It's stored in there. It's just not a full cell, so they didn't cap it. And if you're in doubt about it, I get a lot of frames of uncapped honey. When I pull my honey, I plan it out. So when I pull it, I put it in my honey house, and I stack my boxes like this. One this way, one this way, one this way. I crisscross them so they can get airflow through there. And I'll run a dehumidifier for 2 or 3 days. When I come back, I take my refractometer, dip it in a few of those open cells and put it on there and check the Brix reading. It's always below 18.5, and usually it's below 18. So it's ripe honey at that point. So that's a myth that you cannot extract honey that's not capped.
I didn't know that.
Yeah.
Because my other hive, when I had taken honey in the summertime, some of those frames I was able to put back into the 2 hives that I had. Some of them, I had more than I needed, so I was putting them aside because my hive swarmed a few times over the last couple months. So I kept it to try to add to it, and I kept it outside in this container. And what I didn't realize is, I guess moths or, waxworms.
Wax moths.
And I didn't know about that, so then when I added more frames to my hive about a month ago, now that hive is dead. But I
Well,
guess
that may or may not have anything to do with the wax moths.
Right.
But wax moths, just so people know, because I get this a lot too, wax moths will never kill your hive. Your hive is already dying. They're just opportunists. Wax moths come in, we get them up here, they start showing up about the end of June, middle to the end of June. The adult female moth, she comes at night, she flies into the entrance, the bees let her in, crawls up in there, she lays eggs through the hive, and she leaves. Those eggs hatch, strong hive, the bees remove those larvae, kill them, and get rid of them. A weak hive, the bees can't keep up. More wax moths come in than the bees can take care of, and they finally overwhelm. They start making that webbing, and the feces all through it. And the larvae, they're chewing everything. They overwhelm what little bees are left there. The one thing people don't think about is, now the wax moths are really after the frass and the pupal cocoon that's left behind. We all have brood frames where we see, this wax out here is really nice and light, and this is very brown in the center where the brood nest is. That's the residual pupal cocoon that gets left behind every time a bee hatches. They can't remove it. So they get a thicker and thicker and thicker layer in those cells. That's why that wax tends to get thicker and thicker, right? That's what the wax moths are eating. That's what they like. They rarely will attack a straight honey super, extracted honey super. What we have to remember is they are almost from June on until we start getting regular frost. There are always wax moth eggs in all of your supers and brood boxes. So if I took this super off of honey and I took it in my honey house and I extracted it, and after I extracted it, I put the frames back in this box and I stacked it there in my stack of supers, there are wax moth eggs in there. They're going to hatch and they're going to make a mess in there, right? So you always want to remember that and do something to prevent that. Anytime you store brood boxes or supers, you have to watch out for wax moths. If you don't have a lot of hives, say you only have a box worth, you can put it in your freezer if you have a spare freezer or room in your freezer. Freeze them for a few days, 2-3 days at about 0 degrees. It'll kill all the wax moths in there, larvae and eggs. Then you can put it back in the box here and store it somewhere airtight so no more can get in. If you have a lot of supers, you want to use something like our paramoth. It's paradichlorobenzene. That I use that because I have stacks and stacks of them. So that's what I use to keep the wax moths out of mine. Any other
you
questions?
treat all your drawn comb that way, basically.
All my drawn comb, right? Whenever I remove drawn comb at the end of the season, like normally I'll let the bees rub out the honey that's left because these are, they're wet and sticky. When you extract them, you never get all the honey. They're still wet and sticky. If you put them out somewhere where the bees can get to them, not right in your bee yard because you'll incite robbing, put them a ways away, 50, 100 yards or more away, the bees will clean them out in a day. And they'll be bone dry, then you can put them away. Yeah. Yeah. Yes?
Maybe I missed it. The Bee Healthy, what does that do for the...
This one? Or this one? This one? This is essential oils, lemongrass, spearmint oil, things like that. It just promotes intestinal gut health of the honeybee. And it's like a feeding stimulant. There have been some studies that show it has a nominal effect on nosema spores. So
something to feed in the spring or in the fall?
Both. Yeah. Anytime you want to, this is kind of something healthy to add to your syrup. You don't feed this straight. A couple tablespoons of this in a gallon of syrup.
It keeps
it's a feeding stimulant, and it promotes, it's almost like intestinal health. Supposedly it not stops, but it
Probiotics.
helps with. What's that? Well, it's not, but it's not. It's not probiotics for bees because I do have that now. This is not probiotics for bees. But it's supposed to help control nosema to a little bit.
Doesn't that keep sugar water from fermenting also?
Yes, it will.
Yeah,
if you go with straight sucrose, that's one of the problems with feeding sugar water, which you'll run into. You can put a gallon of sugar water on your bees, and they'll empty it in a day. If there's a nectar flow on, they'll ignore your sugar water, and they'll go get the nectar. So that sugar water will ferment within a day or two, a couple days, 3 days. Depending on how hot it is, the essential oils in that will stop that sugar water from fermenting. Now, ProSweet never ferments anyway, so that you don't have to worry about. putting it into this, it just makes this more of a attractive to the bees. So, yes?
What would happen if you don't reduce all your boxes down and you left boxes with just nectar or honey on the top?
What would happen to the hive? Nothing. You just wouldn't get your honey. I always say, yeah, we're in this for a lot of reasons, right? To
You're not
help
gonna-
the bees, to help this.
You're not going to harm them by not reducing it.
Probably
We have a hive,
not.
that one hive that got exceptionally high, and we're just not sure how far down to bring it.
Well, I
We
certainly
can't go
wouldn't.
wrong by not bringing it too low.
Well, you by not bringing it too
Yeah,
low,
you could
you
leave
could
it
bring it
extra
too low.
high, but it's better to let it high than bring it down too low.
Yeah, are these mediums or the deeps?
They're mediums.
I
We were
would-
about 7 high on mediums.
Well, you don't want to go with that many. Number one, you're wasting a lot of great honey for no reason, because the bees aren't going to use it, right? They need what they need,
Right.
60 to 100 pounds. Anything over that is a waste. Come spring, they'll move up into there, they'll start raising brood, and at that point, you can't remove them, right? So my take would be, do an assessment on that. Get it down to 3 boxes. See what's in those 3 boxes. How much honey is in there? If there's not enough in there, you might want to make a full super and put on top of that 3rd box. So you go in with 4, right? I think anything over 4 is probably a waste if those 3 of those 4 are pretty full of honey. I wouldn't, you know.
Is that with all medium boxes, you need 3 or 4 to go into the winter?
If you're running mediums
This is
for your
medium
brood,
8s.
medium 8, medium 10, same thing, it's marginal, the difference.
3 or 4 boxes.
I would, yeah, you want to make sure 2 of those 3 boxes are packed with honey. If you don't have 2 that are fully packed, you might want to add another one, so you go with a total of 4, right? But there's no problem overwintering in medium 8 frame, none. I personally, in my own personal opinion, I think that bees winter over a little bit better in 8 frame equipment, because they're kept a little tighter in there. I like to experiment. I run 10 frame, I run 8 frame, and sometimes they keep track of what lived and what didn't. But there's so many factors, But I think they winter over pretty well in 8 frame equipment. So, anything else? All right, thank you very much. And again, if you ever have any questions, email me, call me.